everyone. Thank you so much for coming to today's class. Happy Monday, happy last class of 2025 for Bal Tashchit, How to Turn Ancient Law into a Force for Earth's Care with Rabbi David Seidenberg. Rabbi David Seidenberg is the creator of neohadish.org and the author of Kabbalah and Ecology, God's Image in the More Than Human World. He teaches on Jewish thought, theology, and halakhah in relation to ecology, human rights, and animal rights. David is also known for his literature work and his translations of Eikhah. David has smikhah from Jewish Theological Seminary and from Rabbi Zalman Shcahcter-Shalomi and lives in Northampton, Massachusetts. Welcome, Rabbi David Seidenberg.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this class. Okay, Bal Tashchit is an important principle in Jewish environmental lore and discussion, and it's the mitzvah to not waste anything. Bal Tashchit means not wasting. Lehashchet means to destroy something. So Bal Tashchit means not destroy. And it's a mitzvah that has many different applications. The fundamental idea is something that we're going to look at immediately, which has to do with the time. So this first comment will give you an idea of how it's generally understood, how people use the idea of Bal Tashchit. This is from Yonatan Nero, who does wonderful work in Jerusalem, specifically bringing people who care about the earth and the environment from different faiths and religions and from different countries to come and explore together what they can do, specifically to use religion in order to create a sustainable earth. So this is a quote from him, and it's very much sort of the standard line in Jewish environmentalism. The commandment of Bal Tashchit, do not destroy or waste, has long been considered central to a Jewish environmental ethic. Now, this is an article he wrote for the Chabad website, so I'm going to bridge it a little bit. Jewish tradition widely forbids wasteful acts, how wasting contributes to degradation of the planet, and how not wasting can help. Oh, and he said, and we will explore how wasting contributes to degradation of the planet and how not wasting can help us improve our lives physically and spiritually. Because that is the basic perspective on Bal Tashchit in the Jewish environmental movement. The second quote we have here, you can see from the title, a critical examination of the Jewish environmental law of Bal Tashchit, is coming from a little bit of a different perspective, recognizing there are difficulties in the law, which we're going to go into very quickly. So he says, Bal Tashchit may not function as the broad-based environmental ethic it is often mistakenly thought to be. But properly understood, it is more focused and hence more useful as a conservationist principle. So we will be asking that question, is it actually useful as a conservationist principle or not? And what are the boundaries? What are the flaws, and can they be remedied? The last quote here we have at the beginning is from Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who interestingly goes on at great length, much more than this one paragraph, about the importance of Bal Tashchit. He makes it actually a foundational principle of his understanding of Judaism, which is unique. And this is what he said. Maybe someone wants to read this, because this is a lovely quote to read. Does anyone want to?
I can read it.
Great, thanks, Adam.
What paragraph am I starting on?
This one, do not destroy anything.
Do not destroy?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do not destroy anything is the first and most general call of God. If you should now raise your hand to play a childish game, to indulge in senseless rage, wishing to destroy that which you should only use, wishing to exterminate that which you should only exploit, and if you should regard the beings beneath you as objects without rights, not perceiving God who created them, and therefore desire that they feel the might of your presumptuous mood, instead of using them only as means of wise human activity, then God's call proclaims to you, do not destroy anything. Be a mensch. Only if you use the things around you for wise human purposes, sanctified by the word of my teaching, only then are you a mensch and have the right over them which I have given you as a human. However, if you destroy, if you ruin, At that moment, you are not a human, but an animal, and have no right to the things around you.
There's plenty to critique in this statement, but I want you to notice first and foremost how foundational he understands Bal Tashchit to all the enterprise of Judaism and Jewish practice. He defines it as a fundamental principle that makes you human, to be able to choose not to waste. This is a remarkable statement, and we'll see if that's upheld in the halakhah. The first question I want to ask you, though, before we actually get into the tachlis, is what halakhah could you derive from this very flowery, big rhetorical statement? Could you derive a halakhah from what he said here, or not? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Let's say, for example, does it tell you whether or not you can cut down a tree? I guess what I want to point out to you is I don't think, in my opinion, if you disagree, let me know, I don't think you can actually derive any tachlis rules of practice from this statement. Yes, go ahead, Holly Blue.
Well, I think that there's we need to draw a distinction between a law and a value.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to me, just in terms of the sequence of things, we make laws using our values as the sort of the parent. You know, if you think of values as being the parents and the laws as being the children, those values are the things that drive the building of the laws.
I want to add a little bit to what you said, because you see this line, for example, here. The world around you, if you treat it as though you have rights over it, feels the might of your presumptuous mood. So he's saying it's not good to have a presumptuous mood about the world around you. But if you think about how Jewish law works, it doesn't make rules about what mood you have to be in. There's Musar, parts of Judaism that try to develop character and teach you about that. The whole idea of character development is found here and there in early rabbinic texts, but doesn't really form as a Jewish practice, a way of approaching all of Judaism, until much later. And really some of the earliest clear statement that our character is what Judaism is trying to develop. Some of the best statement of that comes from Bachya ibn Pekuda, some centuries later than the Talmud. So this kind of thing, presumptuous mood, it's not something you can really make a halakhah about. And there's a word for this kind of ethics. There's actually two words that are worth paying attention to. One is the idea of virtue ethics. That is, ethics isn't based on, or doesn't necessarily need to be based on, a set of rules that you follow. It can be based on what is seen as virtuous. That's how the ancient Greeks understood ethics very often. And it's how Shimshon Raphael Hirsch tends to perceive ethics. That you use the rules not because they tell you what to do, because they teach you what kind of human being you should become, what virtues you should aspire to. The other word I want to mention, which you may all know but maybe not, is supererogatory. Have people heard that term? So that refers to things in the law, things in an ethical system that has rules. It means the call to go beyond the rules, so to speak, to go beyond the letter of the law into the spirit, to go beyond the rules and do more than you have to, do in fact much more than you have to in order to be the best person you can be, even if the rules don't require you to be that person. So it's sort of aspirations beyond the rules, things which take you from just following halakhah to becoming the most perfect human being that you can be. So Jewish law doesn't tell us it's a mitzvah and you must therefore be required to become the most perfect human being you can be. It gives you a road to lie on so that you don't become a very bad human being. But it doesn't necessarily tell you, if you just look at it as a bunch of rules, it doesn't necessarily tell you how to become the best human being you can be. And supererogatory are all those things related to values, virtues, that call us to go beyond the mitzvot, the laws, etc., in order to become something as holy as we possibly can aspire to be. There was a hand up I noticed. Was that Holly again? Did you want to say something? Or is it still up? Oh, go ahead, Richard.
Question is, can we think of make up a halakhah based on this? It seems to me that recognizing that God created everything that exists for a purpose, and that we human beings don't have the capacity to understand that purpose, the halakhah could be that we don't destroy anything that God created unless we can justify it as a so-called wise human action.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we would do nothing, we would destroy nothing unconsciously. We would only consciously destroy with justification, however that's defined.
Mm-hmm. And in that case, it's possible that once you define that value, you could derive rules from it. How do you decide what counts as a wise use of something? So it's also possible for virtues and aspirations to become a foundation for rules, mm-hmm. even when they call us to go beyond rules. So that's important to keep in mind also. So let's look at the actual Torah text, which this is all based on. Kitatzor el ir yamim rabim. When you siege against a city, many days. Lehilachem alaha, to make war against her, litofsa, to capture her. Now already we're living in a world that's not a normal ethical situation, right? That's an extreme situation. Lo tashchit et eitzah, ye will not destroy her tree, lindoach alav garzin, to swing against her an axe or the iron of an axe. Ki mimeno tochel, because from him you will eat. I should say eight in this case is masculine, because from him you will eat. V'oto lo tichot, and him you may not cut down. Ki, for ha'adam eitz hasadeh, is the tree of the field a person? Lavo rak eitz. There seems like I skipped a word here. To come against you. Yeah, it looks like a part of the line cut off. To come against you. Only the tree which you know is not for eating. Oh, here I see. This is one of those things that happens when you mix English punctuation and Hebrew writing. Sometimes things get put out of order. Here we go. That's now in the right order. Still no. It's not gonna fix itself right now. I'm just gonna read it to you. Lavo mipanecha b'matzor, to come against you. Rather, only the tree that you know is not for eating may you eat. All the words are there, but they've been mixed up in order because of some English punctuation got mixed in with the Hebrew. We won't worry about that for now. I'm going to read you the literal verse just so you have it in your head. Let's do that, and I will fix this later for the PDF that you. Let's continue. Actually, I'll come back to that. For lo eight. I'm going to go back to my translation. For this is the tree of the field a human to come before you, or to attack you, or to flee from you, or to come under siege by you in the siege? Only the tree that you would know that he is not a food tree. Eitz ma'achal. Him you may destroy and cut and build a siege against the city which makes war with you, until she falls, or another way to translate this part, until you dominate her. Okay, apologies for the mixed up order. In a war, you're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree. You're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree even though it would help you win the war, because you could use it to build a ramp to overcome a wall, or use it to create a battering ram against a gate. So that's things you might use a tree for. You can't use a fruit tree for that. Now the truth is most fruit trees are not very good for anything like that anyway. The only thing that might be good for that would be a palm tree, because most trees that are fruit trees are too twisty to be used to build things. But even if it's a tree that you could use as a battering ram, or that you could use to build a ramp, you're not allowed to destroy it. Now, the rabbis understood that if you can't destroy a tree in the most extreme situation when you're at war and lives are at stake, then it must be that you shouldn't really destroy anything at all. And that's a pretty coherent interpretation, that this might have a broader application. And therefore they applied the principle of Bal Tashchit, which comes from this phrase, lo Tashchit. Bal Tashchit is this word here. Lo Tashchit, Bal Tashchit. They understood it to apply to all things living and inanimate. You can't destroy a chair. You can't destroy clothing. The rabbis even said, and this is a supererogatory statement, someone who gets angry and destroys something for no reason, they're like an idolater. They're like someone who commits idolatry. Now, that's a worthy discussion. What are the values that are being expressed in that idea, which we may have time to come back to? But I want to get to a few other points before we do that. So here is some of the earliest halakhah. Here is this section from Sefer Devarim. This paragraph and this paragraph. You will not destroy her tree by swinging an axe against him. I learned nothing from this except that there's a prohibition of using an axe of iron, as it's translated here. From where in the verse do I know it's prohibited even to divert the water away from the tree? From you shall not destroy her tree. Lo tashchit et eitzah. So it said lo tashchit et eitzah lindoach alav garzen. Lomar lo tashchit et eitzah b'chol davar. It emphasizes, or it repeats, the idea of not destroying, because you can't cut it down and you can't do anything else to it either. So already in this one interpretation we have a very much broader interpretation, because why would you divert a water stream in the middle of a siege away from a tree? Well, the one thing you might want to do it for is to prevent the water from reaching the city, so that the people have to surrender because of thirst. So in general, Jewish law in times of war also is supposed to forbid things like that. Starving populations, cutting them off from water. That's not a way that you're supposed to do a siege. But as we know from the modern world, these laws are generally not followed the way they should be. Now, in the next paragraph, only a tree that you know, this is a fruitful tree. If it's not a fruitful tree, this means it's a barren tree. So that means a tree that doesn't give fruit, or a tree that stopped giving fruit. This part of the Sefer Devarim says, we are hereby taught that you should cut down a barren tree before a fruitful tree, but if you have to, you can cut down a fruitful tree if there's nothing else to cut down. So once you say that, there's not really much value to Bal Tashchit as an environmental law anymore. Because then if it just means you shouldn't cut down a fruit tree first, you're often in a situation where you could probably cut down a fruit tree. We have the same thing here in Maimonides, Hilchot Malachim. Maimonides, also known as Rambam. So he says we don't cut down fruit trees outside a city or prevent an irrigation ditch from bringing them water. We just heard that in Sifrei, as it says. And anyone who does this should be lashed. Lashing is a common rabbinic punishment, which is not something we do anymore, obviously. This does not apply only in a siege, but in all situations. Anyone who cuts down a fruit tree with destructive intent should be lashed. It is permissible to cut down any non-fruit-bearing tree, even if you have no need to do so. So in other words, even if you're not going to use it for something, just because you don't like it there anymore, you can cut it down. No, again, if you can cut down any tree if it's not bearing fruit just for any reason, well, a lot of the trees we need in order to create a sustainable earth don't bear fruit, right? And so that kind of undermines the use of the law. Now, in the time of climate change, people have said, particularly in the Jewish environmental movement, that all trees bear fruit because all trees give off oxygen and take up carbon dioxide, and the fruit is the reality of being able to have a stable climate, which we have to have in order to survive. And so therefore all trees are in a sense fruit-bearing trees because of what they do for the earth. And that's a good argument that counters this. It's not an argument that works in a world where people argue about whether climate change is real or not, which is true in the world that deals with Jewish law, unfortunately. The next part here, for Maimonides, what is the yield? Oh, here, sorry. If a fruit tree has become old and produces only a slight yield, so that it's not worth taking care of anymore, then you can cut it down. And what's the minimum it must produce? For an olive tree is the example given in the Talmud, a quarter of a kav of olives. It's not that much, but it's... A kav is in the sort of the realm of a bushel, that kind of a measurement. So similarly, a date palm which yields a kav of dates should not be cut down. Dekel shehu oseh kav temarim lo yikutsenu. Sorry, saying it wrong. The prohibition doesn't apply to trees alone. Here's the supererogatory dimension. Anyone who breaks utensils, tears garments, destroys buildings, stops up a spring, ruins food with destructive intent, all of them are transgressing the command, do not destroy. Actually, that's pretty straight law. However, they are not lashed. They receive a different kind of whip, the whip of rebelling against the rabbis. There's two ways of getting whipped as a punishment in ancient Judaism. One is because the Torah says you should, and one is because you didn't listen to the rabbis. And they're different categories. None of those have application in our day today. Okay. This is a bunch of halakhic stuff which is intricate, and I want to go first to other things, and then we'll come back to what I just skipped over. Because my sense is that this is not a group that's coming with a strong halakhic background. Is that correct? Yeah? Okay. So we're going to go a little past that, and I'll come back to that because it will be important. Baba Kama here says, one might have thought that a person should give precedence to cutting down a barren tree even if the barren tree is greater in monetary value than the fruit-bearing tree. The verse states only, which means that this is an exception to the rule. If the not fruit-bearing tree is worth more in lumber than the fruit-bearing tree is worth for its fruit, you're allowed to cut down the fruit tree and keep standing the non-fruit-bearing tree. So what this tells us is that basically, if it's worth more, you can cut it down. In other words, the measurement of what's worth saving is based on monetary value, not on the idea that fruit trees are beautiful, not on the idea that sustainability matters, but on the idea that what things are worth, how much money you can get for them in the market, is how you measure whether a tree is worth saving or not. People following me? Yeah? Any questions about what I just went over? No? Yes? Holly?
Yeah. The thing that's playing in my head at this point is that we understand things differently in terms of the interconnected cycles of for example, you could say, well, if a tree is providing a soil kind of a situation which fosters chanterelles, and that's fruit. Mm-hmm. You have an oak tree in a rainy environment, and so you have chanterelles. Because of that oak tree, can you then defend the oak tree because the chanterelles are thriving in its environment?
Yes, you could. Mm-hmm. And there's a very specific halakhic case which reflects that particular idea, which is the case given in the Talmud is that if a date tree is growing near grapevines, and because of that, I have no idea if this is botanically possible, but the way it's described in the Talmud, so because of that, the dates taste like grapes, and therefore they're not good for selling as dates. Then that means that the palm tree is not valuable anymore, and you can cut it down, because what matters is protecting the date tree. It's not exactly the same as what you're saying, Holly, but it relates to it. In general, if the value of the tree alive in its place is greater than the value of cutting it down and selling its wood, then you should be required to keep the tree. But then if it's just based on monetary value, like it would be if you were growing chanterelles in order to sell them, then everything is subject to market pressure and nothing has intrinsic value, which is quite different than what Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was telling us in that earlier quote, which is that the reason why you shouldn't waste it because everything is the Creator's and you have no right to act presumptuously over it because it has its own intrinsic value, independent of you. And if you fail to recognize that, you lose your intrinsic value. Not only do you violate the intrinsic value of the trees, but he uses his expression, which is problematic but is important, that you go from being a human to just any old animal. Mm-hmm. Now, that's obviously a problematic way to think about ethics, and I just want to highlight that before we go on. If you think that what it means to be unethical is to be an animal, you haven't paid much attention to the way humans act compared to animals, particularly in our day and age. Now, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch had possibly a much more optimistic view of humanity than we might have today, especially knowing that he came before the Shoah, right? Before the Holocaust. So we want to find, if we want this to be an environmental law, we want to find some basis for thinking that intrinsic value is what matters. Not because you can sell the chanterelles in the marketplace, but because this is a beautiful thing to have in one's world. What if it was something growing in the shade of the tree that was good for other animals, but not good for us to eat? So we didn't benefit directly from it. What about that case? Well, in a holistic case of Bal Tashchit, what value the tree adds to the whole environment would have to take precedence over what value it has just for us. But that's not how the halakhah is constructed, how Jewish law is constructed. Now, this is not because Jewish law is bad or doesn't care about these values, right? It's because, in a way, the idea that we could possibly cause something to become extinct, that we could possibly destroy the ecosystem, was not something known to ancient peoples. And it wasn't known for certain until relatively recently in human history that we could actually destroy the environment, that we could actually cause a species to become extinct. Even through most of the Middle Ages, people didn't think a species could become extinct. They thought that God maybe doesn't watch over every single raccoon, but God would never let the species of raccoon go extinct. Or, to use a real example, passenger pigeon. God watches over each species. Okay, let's go to the questions and then we'll continue further. Diane and then Scott. Go ahead, Diane. You need to unmute.
I'm not sure I agree with you.
Good.
I think the concept of going extinct is built into the reason given to us. We're not told don't cut down fruit trees because dummy, you're not going to have fruit. It says because are they like humans who can run away? Mm-hmm. So it isn't like we don't know what, we're being told why. I mean, we also, not for nothing, have a halakhah. Don't cut down the fruit tree anymore. And
right.
But and we're told why. Not value, but agency. Because the tree can't protect itself the way humans can. So I hear what you're saying and I agree, but I think if we're going to lift this up for the environmental movement in the Jewish voice, it's there. I've taught Bal Tashchit to kids since the 80s with Ellen Bernstein, Oliver Scholler. Yes. And kids kind of get it.
Let's go to some quotes that reflect what you're saying right away. And then I was going to say these for last, but let's go to them right now. So Yitzhak Abravanel says, this is Middle Ages, later in Spain, it is not right that you would do thus to the trees, to destroy them, but you may do so only to the people. For it is not the right of a strong man that he would empower himself to make war against the weak. And this is why, and him you will not cut. This is why there's a rule that says you will not cut. For he's a tree and he has no hands to fight. For is the tree of the field a human? So notice that he is using that part of the verse that we haven't used yet at all to justify this idea that the trees are kind of subjects that have moral rights in some sense or another. And we look here at Len Goodman, this quote right here, and this is his interpretation of the verse. And again, he's basing it on the part of the verse that you just focused on, Diane. The trees are assigned interests, and their interests are made vivid rhetorically by pleading the trees' defenselessness. They cannot withdraw into the city. They are innocent, and it follows that they should be spared. The trees have interests, and because they have interests, they have deserts. Deserts is a way of saying rights, a modified way of saying rights. But notice, both of them are using that part of the verse that you highlighted, Diane, and that part of the verse doesn't have any halakhah in it. It doesn't have anything you can make a rule out of. And so even though people have been inspired by that verse to come up with the kind of virtues and values that you're talking about, which is why this verse is beloved of the Jewish environmental movement, it was never used halakhically to do anything. And because of that, because only the first part is used halakhically, then it became, it turned into a question of monetary value. So in a way, there's two things that we want to do to make a future for this law that actually creates a beautiful, sustainable world, which is not the case at the moment. We have to lift up the part of the verse that Diane just pointed out and make the values being taught by the verse determinative of the halakhah, which is not the case anymore. Right now, the values of the verse are all entirely supererogatory, have no Jewish legal ramifications. So we would have to change that part, first of all. And second of all, we would have to change halakhah in general so that we're not measuring the value of things based on how much money you can get for them. Right? And that's a fundamental problem that is in a different reality now than it was even 100 years ago in terms of the way capitalism operates, in the terms of the way money operates. Right? And so actually, it's not that the law can't do what we need it to do. It's that the situation that we needed to address didn't exist when it was formulated. So this is quite radical transformation. If we could get the Orthodox world, where halakhah is most focused on, to make these changes, as many Orthodox rabbis I know who love Jewish environmental ethics and care much about the environment would like to do, if we could do that, then we would have an argument that could be addressed to everyone, whether or not they believed in climate change, whether or not they believed capitalism was more important than socialism or vice versa. It wouldn't depend on those kinds of political differences. But now it does depend on those political differences. And so that fundamentally has to change, because if the law just means something to the people that already agree with the values that we think it expresses, well, it's not going to control society. It's not going to change what people do who don't already agree with it, with the values of it that we're seeing in it. Scott, you have your hand up. Sorry for the delay.
No, thank you. To that, it sort of relates to the point you just brought up, I think. And my thought was, I like the distinction you're making between the intrinsic value and this sort of monetary value. 'Cause what I've observed sort of in the world of the environmentalism, you've probably seen this in a number of years. They're actually trying to translate these sort of nebulous contributions to the environment that a tree makes into a monetary calculus, right? They're trying to sort of figure out that value. So maybe that's an argument against taking that and, trying to avoid doing that kind of thing. Even for the environmentalists are sort of playing that card, trying to say, okay, well, if you're going to think about, the market impacts, let's do this calculation and come up with a reason why that tree is so valuable and we need to keep it. It's different from what you're saying, which is really very interesting. I'm interested in hearing where you go with this intrinsic direction.
Yeah, I want to speak a little more to what you just brought up because it's very important. So a lot of the general environmental ethics movement tries to make itself translatable into economics in order to be arguing against the people who don't care about these values, right? And to say, if you care about money, then you have to care about this too, because you can reduce it to money, and it still comes out the way we tell you it should come out, which is you don't clear cut a forest because forests provide services to society in terms of atmosphere, in terms of weather, in terms of oxygen, in terms of flood mitigation, in terms of bounty that can be harvested by human beings. But if you reduce it all to market value, then there's no intrinsic value to anything still. And also, how do you value beauty? That's not you can't put that in market terms, right? And so it captures something, and I'll tell you, there is a place for that monetary evaluation. So we shouldn't just say, don't do it, it's bad. Don't do it, it's bad if it's the only way you determine value. But bottom line, we need halakhah to determine not just whether something's right or wrong environmentally, but also when you have two courses of action, each of which has environmental costs, and each of which has environmental benefits. A good example of this might be, say, a nuclear power plant has clear environmental benefits and clear, profound environmental costs in terms of what happens to the waste and what happens if there's an accident. But the idea of generating power without generating carbon dioxide, without generating greenhouse gases, well, that's as time goes by, becomes more and more important. And so assigning monetary value to these things can help us decide whether this choice or that choice is the better one environmentally. But it can't teach us what has intrinsic value. And this halakhah also, in the same sense, halakhah is masterful when you are existing or operating in a field where the values are already clear and meaningful. The halakhah gives you very precise ways of determining which action do you take when you have a choice of permitted actions which have different possible environmental effects. Then you bring in the halakhah, and then you weigh in maybe monetary value, maybe you weigh in other halakhic values that matter, like the sanctity of the land, right? And what respects the sanctity of the land more. Right? So there's many different dimensions to this, and what I'm looking at here and what I want to share, what I'm sharing with you here, is just that the foundation is missing. The foundation is weak, faulty, and cannot support the world we need. But the law itself provides a structure if we can give it the foundation. I did not see who raised their hand first, Holly or Kay. Someone pick.
So let me defer to Kay because I've been talking.
Okay. I can hear you, although it's soft.
Okay. All right. I'll speak up. So in the spirit of Rabbi Hirsch, I always like to tie it back to our initial creation myth, in which the Blessed Holy One looks at each thing and says, "This is good," until we get to being alone and then it's local. And that I think that sets a model for us that we have to make those decisions as well. We see something, including these wars, we're so busy protecting people's right to put their trees down to fight. And we have to make those decisions. We have to base it on everything we've learned, everything we have seen, observed, everything we've been part of and loved, and decide whether it's good or not. And I think, for me, that's been the bedrock of why we don't waste. Because those things, by definition, that the Holy One has given to us, those are good. Already been set.
Right.
And we don't throw them away, we don't damage them, we don't protect people's right to make war on each other using these laws.
And that's very much related to what Hirsch said, Rabbi Hirsch said at the beginning. It also happens to have a very deep relationship to Maimonides, to Rambam, because he said the definition of the word good is exactly what we mean by intrinsic value. meaning it's not valued on the basis of whether it's good for human beings. In fact, he completely disrespected and denied and forbid the idea that you should think of things in terms of their value to humanity. Everything that exists indoors was created for its own sake, and that's why it says it is good. And we know that the whole of creation is more important and more good than anything, including humanity, which is, he says, as a value of nothing compared to the whole of creation that exists and endures, which is called tov ma'od, very good. So to the extent that our actions serve the whole of creation, the tov ma'od, then that's the value upon which we can rest. A Jewish law about not wasting that will help us and will get us where we need to go. So that's very powerful. Another thing to mention, before Holly gets a chance to speak, is that the creation story, the idea of Tov Ma'od is part of the first creation story. The second creation story, which begins right after that, the one with the Garden of Eden and the trees, tells us a different but also important story, because in that part of the story, in that section of the Torah, it says 3 times that the person, the human, is created in order la'avod et ha'adamah, to serve the ground. It said when the human is put into the garden. It said when the human is moved out of the garden. It says that God takes the human out of the garden because they ate from the tree they're not allowed to eat from, and puts them in la'avod et adama asher lukach misham, to serve the ground that they were made out of, because the human is not made in the Garden of Eden but transferred to the Garden of Eden.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that, and I'm glad I waited, because in a sense you're responding to what I've been thinking about, which is looking for within our value system the concept of capstone species. The ones that everything else in a sense depends on, even simply in a knock-on sort of a way. And if we think of ourselves, if we think of human beings as a capstone species, and that makes us a servant to everything else, rather than as having mastery over it, in the sense that so often it gets interpreted in English as being, that we can do whatever we want with anything, instead of that everything depends on us behaving well.
So I just want to underline, the problem we're talking about that is the ultimate problem is anthropocentrism. The idea that what it means to be human is that we were at the pinnacle, not just the center, because anthropocentrism literally only just means humans at the center. Not just that we're at the center, but everything is beneath us and is here to serve us, which is a common idea in Jewish theology. It's not the only idea. Maimonides radically rejects that idea, as I mentioned. But Saadia Gaon, who was also rather important, made it very clear that he says you shouldn't be perplexed about the purpose of humanity, about the purpose of creation, because the purpose of the creation is to serve humanity. He says very clearly about it. You shouldn't be perplexed about the place of humanity in relation to the rest of creation. It's here to serve us. So we're talking about an overthrow of an ideology which is not essential to the Torah, but which is woven into Jewish thought from at least the 9th century, and in some degree earlier than that as well. And basically, and since the time of Jewish philosophy existed, the idea that everything is here to serve us has been a part of Jewish philosophy, although not of every Jewish philosopher. So Rambam rejects that. A few other people reject it, but most people accept it. So again, we're the fight to make Bal Tashchit meaningful is also a fight to get people to see the world not through the lens of anthropocentrism anymore. Right. So I'm going to do some text really quickly here. May I go carry to 2:10? Since I had
we have some time, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Okay. So these two texts, which we're not going to go into in detail, both address the question, if someone doesn't own something, are you allowed to destroy it? Now that seems like a crazy question, doesn't it? But the Noda B'Yehuda, who is very important in Jewish law, is not sure about whether something ownerless, hefker is the word in Hebrew, has any prohibition of being destroyed or not. He thinks maybe you can destroy it. He's not sure about it, but he says maybe, perhaps. Perhaps it's possible, even for something that is hefker, that you're allowed to destroy it. Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, says the opposite. He says, since the law tells us we're not allowed to destroy even the possessions of non-Jews, the city you're making a war against, then that means all the more so you shouldn't be able to destroy things that don't belong to non-Jews and that belong to Jews. Now you have to know that his statement there is rooted in an ancient and Talmudic idea that if a person who is not Jewish loses something, you can keep it and don't have to return it to them. Now, that's not the halakhah as it came down to us in the modern day. It was a debated discussion in the Talmud. And the Talmud says, yeah, you could keep something that's lost that belongs to a non-Jew, but if you do, you're dishonoring God and you're a icky person, basically. But it doesn't say it's forbidden. It says you can do it, but you shouldn't for supererogatory reasons, for not legal reasons. But because there's that whole discussion about non-Jews, there's this idea that non-Jewish property is at a lower level than ownerless property, which is at a lower level than Jewish property. But he says, so therefore, that means you can't destroy anything ownerless either. But this means that there are people in the halakhic tradition that say, yes, you can destroy something that's ownerless. So from that perspective, the world is an open place of destruction, pretty much. And if someone doesn't own it, you're not harming anyone, and therefore you're not violating Bal Tashchit. So that's when you take Bal Tashchit and make it anthropocentric and say it matters about what it does to humans, how it helps humans, how it hurts humans. Then you get to the place where if no one owns it, you could potentially destroy it. Now, that is not the halakhah, at least. The halakhah, as it comes down, doesn't say that you can destroy ownerless things. It does say you shouldn't destroy anything for no reason at all. But it does mean that the halakhah says if you can cut down a redwood forest and make a good piece of money by doing it, then it's permitted. Because no one owns it otherwise, and no one is benefiting from it otherwise because they're not getting money out of the deal. It doesn't have market value, and you have to turn it into market value. So this is the kind of thing that halakhah has made some progress on, because in the modern age, no one thinks you can destroy things that are ownerless, whereas in earlier times, some people did think that. But there's still a ways to go. The last thing I want to share with you, which will be a little bit shocking, I think, given especially that we have all of us on our minds, no matter what your politics, the war with Israel and Gaza, and also the kind of low level war that's happening in the West Bank, the tearing up of olive trees, which I'm sure you've all heard about. So this is the most shocking text that I'm going to bring to you. So first of all, Rambam, Maimonides, says we are warned against destroying trees when we lay siege against a city. We may not do it in order to distress her people and cause their hearts pain. You're not allowed to do it if the purpose is to cause pain to the enemy. That's a very strong statement, and it says some deep things about the conduct of war, which are quite enlightened. Yeah? But look what Nachmanides says when he comments on the same issue. And he comes after Rambam. He says, this commandment is when we besiege the city to fight against it, to snatch it. We should treat it the way we could be concerned about our own possessions, because maybe we're going to conquer it. Again, use value, not intrinsic value. But upon our leaving the land of the enemy, we destroy, or we can destroy, and wreck every good tree. Tashchit v'nechbal kol eitz tov, to hurt the people of the city by the destruction of the trees so that they will not live off them. This interpretation of the Nachmanides blows everything out of the water. It completely destroys any possibility of Bal Tashchit having a basis. He's not the determiner of all halakhah, but his opinion exists. And we can see people acting like this. When some of what are called the hilltop youth, who have now started calling themselves the hilltop barbarians, isn't that charming, have gone and uprooted trees belonging to Palestinians. They're not reading Ramban and saying, oh, therefore it's permitted, let's go destroy things. Even Ramban would not permit that, because you haven't finished the war yet. You might still conquer, and therefore you can't destroy the fruit tree. But it creates a situation where the fruit tree can have negative value, that the value is not the tree, but destroying the tree, and that's what matters, and that's the good thing you should aim for. So the fact that that even exists in halakhah is tragic and heartbreaking, I think, when I think about it. I wish he never wrote that. I want to show you something else he wrote, which just, I don't understand how he said both these things. Here's something he said when he was writing about Shiluach HaKen, sending away the mother bird so she doesn't see you take the eggs. He says, Scripture does not permit doing any destruction, hashkata, that would uproot a species, even though it permits slaughter of a particular species. And behold, one who kills mother and children in one day, or takes them, it's as if they are cutting off the very species. Now, as I mentioned, Ramban lived at a time where he did not believe that extinction could actually happen. And yet he envisions the possibility of extinction as something that is so bad that you should avoid anything that looks like it, even if God wouldn't let it happen. So this is the same Ramban who said you're allowed to cut down the fruit trees in order to make the people of the city you're attacking feel horrible and miserable and defeated. I don't know how these two opinions lived inside the same person. I'm very curious about that. The last thing I want to point out to you, and then we'll have a little bit more for a discussion, is that we know from stele reliefs and friezes, that is stone sculptures made by the Assyrian Empire to record their conquests, that one of the things they did is, if the city that they came to conquer opened up to them and submitted and became part of the Assyrian Empire, well and good, they wouldn't destroy anything. But if the city refused to open up to them and submit to them, surrender to them, the punishment was to cut down all of their fruit trees. That was the first thing the Assyrians did. Because fruit trees, remember, are planted outside the city wall mostly. So they would, as the beginning of their siege, when the people had refused to submit, they would be looking at this army besieging them and watching them cut down all their fruit trees. So one of the actually fundamental ideas in Bal Tashchit is probably something that we're not even aware of anymore, that we're not aware of already by the time people are studying the Torah in rabbinic periods, which is that it's a prohibition to act like the idolatrous nations, and specifically the idolatrous oppressor nations, who did cut down the fruit trees on purpose in order to harm, in order to distress and cause pain to the enemy. That we're not allowed to do that. So Rambam agrees with that, and Ramban disagrees with that. Okay, what other questions? Let's get into a little more discussion. We have a few more minutes. There's a lot of material here to take in. What I want to emphasize is we can change this halakhah to make it relevant and meaningful, but we're not going to get there by pretending that there's not a problem. We need to be aware of the problem in order to fix it. Holly, you have a hand up.
Yeah, it's just a very quick question. I think about Ecclesiastes, Solomon, and how his moods changed over his lifetime. And I'm wondering if we have any idea when in the course of the Ramban's life those two opinions were uttered. I know the last part of his life was, in a sense, he was in exile from his family, although he had moved back to Jerusalem. And I just wonder if the course of his life itself changed his values.
That's such a good question, which I had not thought of asking. So thank you very much for bringing it up. Does anyone else on the call, Shmuley, if you're listening, do you know if Sefer HaMitzvot was written before or after his commentary on the Torah? I don't know if anyone knows that. That can be looked up, so I will look it up. In fact, I'll look it up and I will incorporate it into this PDF, which Valley Beit Midrash will make available to you. I'm going to do some changes and fixing it up before that. So we'll know the answer at some point, and we can reflect on it and see what it means. Kay and Diane?
So there's been so much articulate work done in the past 50 years, trying to pull from Torah those values and strengths that we need to have for those who are involved in environmental activism, for those who really care about, what's the future of the earth. So I'm interested to ask you, because you raised the question of what kind of halakhic statements one could evolve. What would be the process for doing that? How could voices of reform and progressive come up with anything that would be acceptable in a halakhic world, no matter how concretely it was founded in what we think to be strong Torah?
Well, one of the bottom lines is that people who are from conservative to the more left liberal in religious terms can't have influence on halakhah in the Orthodox world, because it is constructed so that people who are outside that are outside the boundary of what Zalman Shcahcter would call Catholic Israel. That is true Israel, the true deciders of what counts. But we can, along with Orthodox rabbis who care about these values, work on it together, and then they can bring those findings into the Orthodox world in the way that other people may not be able to. So it's a work that we can do together as an environmental movement or as people who care about these issues, where only some of the people who can do the work can actually make it effective, which is unfortunate but not terrible, because there are plenty of Orthodox rabbis who do care about these things. They're not in the majority, but they are. But they're strong and they matter. So
if you want to encourage that direction, what sort of stuff would you bring? I mean, we have to obviously send somebody like you who's male and knowledgeable. But what would you take if you were to go into that conversation with an Orthodox rabbi who's sympathetic?
I'll show you something right now. We're at 4:10, but we'll stay on for long enough for Diane to ask her question or make her comment. I'll show you one text that we didn't get to yet. This one from Midrash Hagadol, which interprets there being 3 prohibitions in the Torah text that we started with. 1, don't destroy her tree. This is the one who prunes, hamachsiach, the branches, one who cuts off the branches. To swing an axe against him, that's the next part of the line. This counts as the logger, the one hakotzitz who cuts through the trunk, topples the tree. For from him you will eat. This is the 3rd clause of that sentence. This means the person who uproots ha'oker, the entire tree, which means it never has a chance of growing back either. From here you may say that one who uproots a tree violates all 3 commandments: the commandment to not cut off the branches, the commandment not to log the tree, and the commandment not to uproot the tree. There's a whole halakhic framework there that can be delineated with levels of destruction, specifically in relation to trees and specifically in relation to sustainability. And so I would say this verse is one that gives us some rich potential in order to develop a halakhic framework with levels defined. Also, I would go to Ramban. Because he says one who kills mother and child in one day is as if they're cutting off the very species. Well, when you cut down a forest, or even a single tree, you are very often killing mother and children in one day if there are any animals nesting in that tree, which there will for sure be in any forest. Maybe a particular tree you can chase the mothers and the nests and the people there, the animals there away, but that's not going to be true for a whole forest. So that tells us also something about how do you cull tree. If you want to get a tree, how can you take them down? You can't take them down by clear cutting a forest. You take them down by picking specific trees and leaving enough of a forest for the animals to continue to live. So that's fun. Those are two fundamental frameworks that could be evolved into rules-based halakhah. Okay, Diane?
It sounds like you're calling for an expansion of a middle that takes the halakhah seriously. Everything from conservative on left, we can just go with beautiful, we can handpick beautiful text. It sounds like you're asking for something like halakhic environment, like halakhic left. And I think studying the text, what you said was that we can't get to the good stuff without going through the difficult stuff. We can't just take the low-hanging fruit. And I think that's the lesson of all the text. You said, how could the same man hold the same views? Well, I struggle with that in myself. We all do. And it says something, the very teaching says something about what we all struggle with. We can eat the eggs, but we don't want to torture the mother bird. We can eat the baby goat, but we can't do that action of cooking it in its mother's milk. We can't cut down a fruit tree in war, but how about expanding that option? So the very discussion is useful in that it shows us that 2 or 3 or 100 things can be true, and that's part of our tradition. That's Talmud. So thank you so much. So let's have a
beautifully
halachic
said. Beautifully said. Thank you. So yeah, I think the resources, the framework we need to create what we need to create is there, but we need the will, and we need the consensus, and we need to think it matters. Right? And if we have those things in place, I see Judaism and Jewish environmental law developing in a useful direction. If we don't have those things in place, Jewish environmental law will not help us reach sustainability. There may be other ways to reach sustainability, but I very much like the idea that all parts of Judaism can serve to create a good world and the best world that we can have. So that's the journey we're on. All right. Thank you very much. I want to tell you all, this is the first time I've taught this class. So it's been a little bit of an adventure for me. And I thank you again for coming. Sorry about the glitch with the sound at the beginning, but I'm glad we got a chance to really talk about some good stuff. So,
Rabbi Seidenberg for today's very thought-provoking class, and I just want to let everyone know about the first class of 2026 that we're having on January 8th for Ethics at the Center, Jewish Theory and Practice for a Living Moral Life. It's Rabbi Dr. Elliot Dorf. So I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and Happy New Year, and we will see you in 2026.
thanks. Carrie.